there's Bearden, a picture of Bearden, born in North Carolina. He lived in Pittsburgh. He lived other places. For a while, they were in Canada as a family. But when he came of age, he was living in Harlem. And briefly summering in the South again, he was always going back in his memory to the South. It was very important to him. But it's also very important that Harlem was home. In the midst of the work that he was best known for, portraits of the Deep South or of Harlem and other cities, he interrupted to do a series of collages based on Homer's Odyssey. Now, people were very surprised, even people who knew him well, were very surprised by this choice. But in fact, he had been doing narrative painting all his life, virtually. His first show as a one-man show, one man, right, was the Christ series, The Passion of Christ, in the 1940s.
47.
Okay, yeah. He does the Iliad series, which I think is the next thing you see on the wall back there. The collages are from the late 70s, but the Iliad pieces are also from the 40s. So he likes to do things in series. He's also looking for a story big enough to hold the vision that he has as a Black American who's very deeply committed to his people. And I mean Black and American as the people that he's committed to. So he wants to say the Iliad is a big enough story, the Bible is a big enough story. He and Derek Walcott do a project together. It's Garcia Lorca and he do a project together.
The Bible.
He does the Bible series. That may be it, yeah. So he's part of what we're looking at is an attempt to tell the African American epic using Homer as a foil or as a springboard for it. At the same time, though, this is not a local talent trying to make everything, trying to pretend that Beethoven is Black. Maybe he was Black. But what difference does it make? Who cares? He's trying to make the universal story Black, but he's also trying to show that the Black story is universal. And he does that. The more you know about the history of art, the more you see it. He quotes Picasso all through the Iliad series. As soon as you come to the cutouts, who does that bring to mind right away? Yes. So he's studying Matisse. You go to his library and it's Matisse, 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 Matisse. But you also go there and there's a long African art section as well. And so you start out here, and Bearden starts with his character trying to find home. And it seems to me that one way to look at it is that the home he's seeking is not either Harlem or Greece. The Odyssey and the Iliad are stories that create nations, and the Aeneid creates a nation. He wants to create an international sense of what the home place is. He's not abandoning either Homer or Harlem, but the home he's seeking is a global citizenship home. And so sometimes it looks as if he's arriving in the Caribbean, or it looks as if he's arriving in Venice, or as if he's not insistent on one or the other, because in fact he wants this sense of a varied and multinational home. The second one is it shows a bit about, it was not originally part of the series as it was presented by Bearden in the late 70s, but he does tell us that it's part of his thinking along those lines. And whether or not it's Odysseus telling the story or Homer retelling the story, I think what's fascinating there is the idea that Homer is very aware that, Bearden is very aware that Homer has inherited a twice-told tale. And that if Bearden is influenced by Charlie Parker and Duke Ellington, Homer is influenced by the improvisatory traditions that he inherits too. Sometimes Penelope is patient and sometimes she's not. Sometimes the suitors move in. And there are different ways the stories are told. And it's very important, it seems to me, to recognize that there's a scene in the Odyssey where they sit down and a poet begins to tell a tale and it makes Odysseus weep. And the king who's there says, oh, never mind, Tell it the other way. And he's making clear that it's an inherited tale that he's got, an improvisatory tale.
Can I ask a question about the use of the placement of this one, which seems like it comes at the end of the story? Is that a curatorial choice?
Well, it is. I mean, it's quite honestly, the idea was to say this is a story about seeking home. And so this is introductory. It's a story about improvisation, introductory. And then really, then the Iliads, we want you to see the Iliads stepping back a few decades. But so that's right, it's out of sequence. This is out of sequence too. This Fall of Troy, is it that what it is? The Fall of Troy depicts the Trojan horse and Troy in flames as Bearden sees it. There are no flames in the Homeric version of this. Surely Bearden, who's lived through the riots of the 30s and the 40s and the 50s and into the 60s and 70s, is thinking about the burning of cities that he'd seen and thinking about the United States as a country turned against itself. That's part of the theme of the Odyssey. There's a great moment, of the Iliad, I mean, there's a great moment when Achilles looks across the field and he sees Hector in his own armor. And it seems to me that Homer is saying, oh my God, this is a kind of suicide war. You're facing yourself, killing yourself. So I think when Bearden is thinking about it that way, I also think that he's again and again thinking Greece, and he's also thinking the United States. His friend Ralph Ellison liked to say that that unfortunately the Civil War is still going on. We're still torn apart, and I think that's what we have. And I think as you walk through, you'll see moments when, again and again, these kinds of things are on his mind. You can look at the Odyssey as a heroic tale of Odysseus finding his way and going home, but you can also look at what he sees when you come around here, if you will. So part of what Bearden does is he invokes the old tale, but he changes the perspective. And he gives you a kind of Native American saying, wait a minute, go back to the ships. And there he is running back. That's not usually the one they choose to show, but that's the one he chooses. He makes the ship has a cross at the top to make us wonder what part religion has played in this kind of adventurism. Of course, there's no cross in Homer, but this is Bearden. He's giving you current and ancient at the same time.
Well, can I just speak a little bit about this piece, because this is a good moment to just talk a little bit about Bearden working in this medium. So a lot of people were surprised at his interpretation, not only because it was Homer, a very large story, but also because he did it he did it with paper that he didn't normally use completely like this. At this time, if you think back in the 60s, if you're familiar with his work, his most famous series probably is Projections, and he used reproduced papers from magazines like Look and Life, and he was cutting up and adding fabric and other pieces. He did use this type of paper, but as you can see, very little reproduced paper. It's all of this paper that is machine painted paper called colorade, and it was used by a lot of color theory students. And so the interesting thing about what he does with this type of collage, which he calls sometimes montage, is you see this pink that permeates all the way through, because the pink lays down behind all of the other color, and then he cuts the pieces so that the pink shows through. So that was a technique that he used in some of his other collage. It was a way of highlighting, or just a way of getting that little extra zing, and it's also a way that he was working with underpainting. So in his paintings, he's studied the masters. This idea of underpainting and getting that color to permeate throughout the piece to get a more cohesive color harmony, that was a technique that he brought to collage and that he brought to here without using the reproduced papers, but it's all these solid, beautiful, bright colors.
About a year ago, was it, I talked to Dawn Delbanco, whom some of you may know, Andy Delbanco's wife, who's an Asian art historian. And I showed her some of the work, and I asked her if she could see an Asian dimension here. And she said, oh, well, in fact, there's calligraphy everywhere. And that was a big surprise to me because the African specialist saw Africa everywhere. You can see Africa all over the place with the masks and other icons all through. But she said that the way he made the letters was very influenced by the line of calligraphy. There's something about the tension in that line and the attention to the space between the lines. Yeah, he said, I really, this is something I love, that this idea that he said he wanted, he liked the Chinese calligraphic idea or the artist's idea of an open corner. He said, a place like this, I would think, where it's relatively free of articulation, you know, or figuration, a place for the eye to rest, a place to enter, and a place inviting interaction so that you're interrogating the work and participating in the process of meaning. This is the painting that represents for me the fact that Bearden was not an illustrator of Homer. He was a collaborator with Homer in the creation of meaning. And so instead of the Cyclops as a cultureless monster, as he's usually depicted in a kind of a horrible, gory splash, Bearden makes the Cyclops a baby. After one talk, somebody came up to me and said that she delivered babies every day. And she said that if you do it long enough, you realize that eventually you give, the poor mother has to be told that her baby's only going to live a few minutes, that she's given birth to a Cyclops. It happens once in a while. And the baby cannot live, and all you can do is to protect it and make the few minutes of life as comfortable as possible, say goodbye. And I think Bearden, who at least thought about going to medical school, his mother wanted him to go, decides that the Cyclops should be left alone. There's no reason to go there. The reason Odysseus went there was to steal everything he could get. Mm-hmm. And we think about how great it is that he's tricky and got out. And he is a trickster, and that's great. Trickster hero. But he's also a marauder in Bearden's eyes, being driven back by the ship. And when Bearden, whenever I see these ships in Bearden, I think about, you know, those historical records of how the slave ships looked come to mind. They're all over the room. And I'm sure Bearden is thinking about something about slavery. The one point I want to make before we, if no other, is that Bearden worked by layering. So he wants you to remember this story, but he wants you to think about it in another way. He wants you to see the Greek story and wonder about religion in that. What part did that play here? And Poseidon was his father. Why was he mad at Odysseus and chased him all around the world? You put my son's eye out, and everybody else will forgive you except me. I'm mad forever. And the fact that this is an African king now, who's furious about the way his child has been treated, has a new poignancy when it's a Harlem artist telling his story. It's also the case that we had a conference a couple of weeks ago that was such a knockout, I couldn't believe it. And the people kept talking about this underwater world that we see here, and all the many thousands gone that are under that water. Bearden would know that, of course, very well. So this is the sea god madder than hell about the way things have gone. And there's this son. Bearden is interested in family as he is in telling the heroic story of the individual who comes back and whatever he does. All that's good. But when he passes Scylla and Shabdis, remember Shabdis will suck you down and Scylla will snap your head off. Again, monsters. He makes Scylla she has a monster tail, I'll say that. But he makes her into a sort of a mother bird protecting her nest. And once again, leave her alone. That's what the goddess told him to do. So it's so interesting to me that he cares about a sense of family, a sense of history, this global march, the dangers of a kind of imperialistic impulse, and violations against a home. In the Odyssey, we follow Telemachus for the first third of the story, the young boy finding out who he is by following the father's footsteps. I wish my kids knew that. Anyway, I shouldn't say that. That's part of the reason that it's a story about identity and discovering who you are and a search for kind of interiority and selfhood through the example of the father. But notice that in Bearden's case, most of the images are of women. Virginia Woolf said, follow the mothers back. She has an essay where she says you had to kill your mother too, but never mind that one. Remember the one I'm talking about? Some of you will know. But she says she's following Jane Ellen Harrison and looking for examples of great women that she can follow after. And it's so striking to me that Bearden, whose mother was a powerhouse, decides to make the Circe not a dangerous and terrible witch horror, but this enticingly beautiful, multinational, in Afro-Eurasian goddess. One of the people in a conference said that maybe she's a kind of self-portrait, whether consciously or not, a shape-shifting changer of the order of things that she was. Circe appears more than any other character in the story. And so watch for her all around here. And I'll stop with this one more thing that I think is so significant. Everyone remembers the story of the sirens. I think people who don't remember much of it, if you didn't get that far, in some cases of my students, if you really read this far, but the sirens you knew before you went to class, that Odysseus told his men to tie him to the mast so that he wouldn't jump and die from the beauty of the song. And notice again, Bearden is wondering if this isn't some sort of sacrifice in a religious sense of the term. Steptoe reminded us that it was Gwendolyn Brooks, I think, who said the most beautiful lynchy was our Lord. So he's thinking about lynching too. He works by layers. He's a collagist, one thing over another. So there you get the siren song, but he gives you also this sense, and it keeps on looking like some sort of slave ship to me. Maybe I have it on my mind too much. He makes them not horrible monsters again, but beautiful women. And I think he has in mind here the Old Testament, or the Hebrew Bible story, where you're tempted by knowledge. The sirens are not only beautiful singers, but they're musicians, as Bearden points out, and they know everything. They know the beginning and the end of the story. So it's as if part of what he's trying to resist is the tree of knowledge, if you put it that way, or the apple. And the argument can be made that just as he wants to experience life in other scenes here, Bearden is saying maybe Eve was right. Maybe the snake was right. Maybe it's worth it to die to have the experience of having a choice-making brain rather than following along. I don't want to talk religion, really. But I do think he's thinking about it. The temptation to knowledge, to beauty, to art. He wants it badly enough, and maybe he had to die. And once, of course, the price of this is his life. Potentially, he doesn't. Also, Bearden positions us on the island as if to say, maybe this wouldn't be so bad over here. And you can see, of course, the Matisse everywhere. The show went to several other venues, as I mentioned, and will go to others potentially. But only Columbia will have what's in the other room there. Matisse did a series of Odysseus drawings. Who knew that? I bet people here did know it. I didn't know it. He was asked by James Joyce to illustrate Ulysses, the novel, for a certain edition. And as many others have done, Matisse found Joyce unreadable. At least that one book, he just said he couldn't make heads or tails of it. He tried hard, as the letters show. But he found out from his reading that Joyce had based Ulysses, which is the Latin name for Odyssey, Odysseus, on the Odyssey. And so he illustrated the Odyssey to see what Jimmy would say. And Joyce was not amused, as you can imagine. Although he said he was glad that Matisse had not made the mistake of trying to illustrate his book. He wasn't so happy with this idea of illustrating some other book. But the result is that we have these magnificent drawings. And there you'll see another idea of the Cyclops, and there you'll see another idea of Circe, and so on. And it turns out that the publisher of, when I found out there was a book like that, I went online to try to see if I could get it, and it was $25,000 for edition. And it's funny, I went to class and said, you know, $25,000, I told my class, you know, and one of them immediately said, $22,500 on eBay, but you got to buy it now. So it was a very funny moment. And then I went to the library and found out that we had 2 copies, you know, in our library, and that not only had the publisher who had given his archive to the university included those books, but he included the original Matisse plates. So it's drop dead, incredible. When we did the show at Reed Hall in Paris, I wanted to take those plates, and they said if those Matisse people see those plates, they'll never let them go. So don't miss seeing those. That's incredible. You'll see the handwriting of Matisse right on those plates.